Good evening, Amlendu.
Sir, as I'm already introduced to you, I want to tell you a short description about creation of Lawflix. So
Yep.
3 months ago, my friend Vaibhav Sharma, who is an extensive reader, came across this problem of not having all the blocks at one place. And since then, we both parallelly started working on it and created this app. But we couldn't imagine back then about us having you. Like right after launching this platform, it is a great deal for us to have you. So it's a great moment for us. And since we heard you and saw you addressing some of the really prominent issues on debates and literature festival, but it's really great to clear off the clouds from Indo-China issues and the ancillary issues along with that. But sir, before that, I would like to tell you about my first impression of you. Okay, so it was bold and articulated when in 2018 I was simply swiping on internet and clicked on some informative video and saw the thumbnail projecting Abhijit Iyer Mitra with Anand Ranganathan, and maybe Subramanian Swamy was also there. So it was really enthralling for me personally, because somewhere I was totally convinced, because I was looking for the facts and saw them coming in a great fulfilled manner. And since then I started reading and following you on Twitter and of course on YouTube. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So thanks for having me on, and great meeting you, Amlendu. I finally get to meet you. Shuru kare? I'm just going to dive straight in. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
My audio is clear, na?
Yeah, totally clear. It's totally audible.
Okay. So, first, apologies in advance. You're going to see my dogs keep jumping on me every 15-20 minutes. I'm sorry about that. There's nothing much I can do. Okay. So, when you look at China, India, जो पहले सब देखते हैं, that is the economic difference between the two, right? China was poorer than us. They suffered a lot more than we did. We love talking about the Bengal famine. China went through a whole 2 centuries of horrific famine. The Chinese community in West Bengal came during the Taiping Rebellion, which killed off about 40-50 million people. You had and since then you've had the Japanese army kill off about 11 million people. You've had the Chinese Communist Party kill off about 70 million people, famines and all of that. And I think what people don't realize is that within the space of 150 years almost, when you lose something like 25% of your population in repeated tragedies like this, it leads to a whole generational shift. You lose a lot of your old traditions, which is a bad thing, but it's also a good thing because it gets rid of a lot of the cultural baggage that you carry and things like that. It reforms society in that way, right? So this, you can see with China, it's also been an advantage in a sense. It's obviously been a huge disadvantage as well. So when you look at both the economy and the social structure, and you compare this with India, remember, we have several different kinds of social structures. Right? Bengal में property laws different होते थे, Maharashtra में property laws different होते थे, inheritance laws different होते थे, हर चीज different है. Who you're allowed to marry. So in the south where I come from, in Tamil Nadu, the girl always marries her mama. In the north of India, that would be considered outright incest. Okay, होता ही नहीं है. And there's all kinds of things like that. So what happens is that in China, you see historically, with every dynasty, it didn't matter who the dynasty was. It could be a native dynasty like the Tang or the Ming, or it could be, though Ming ka bahut, there's a big question mark around the Ming because they say the first Ming emperor was actually the illegitimate son of a Mongol. But anyway, wo sab chodo. Either the Tang or the Ming, or foreign dynasties like the Manchu, the so-called Qing dynasty, and the Yuan, the Mongol dynasty, they all pursued one clear policy: uniformity, forced unification, and forced cultural uniformity, forced all kinds of uniformity, to the extent that in the space of the Manchu dynasty, while the Manchu families continue to have, special privileges. Even now, if you go to Beijing, you will see that there are certain hutongs or certain neighborhoods that were reserved only for the Manchu bannermen, which were the 12 tribes of the Manchus. In spite of that, they sinicized to the point where the separate Manchu identity almost ceased to exist. They used to think in Chinese, they used to behave like Chinese, and the Yuan dynasty did the same. Kublai Khan, the revolts he faced within, because he was the great Khan, he was the Khan of Khans. He theoretically controlled all the Khanates, the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate and all of that. The accusation against him within one generation was that he had gone native. He had become too Indian, and he had become too Chinese, and he wasn't Mongol enough to rule. And contrast this with India. Our absorptive capability is almost non-existent. For 900 years, you've had Pathans or Turks ruling us. They either claim to be, the Lodhis claim to be Afghans, the Khiljis and co claim to be Turks. And to this day, if you go to certain parts of UP and Bihar, they still claim they're Pathan or Turk or something like that. I've actually been to Hyderabad and seen, वैसे मैं तो काला मद्रासी हूँ, मेरे से भी बहुत काले लोग हैं उधर हैदराबाद में who will claim to be Turkic, and they have absolutely no ethnic Turkic identifiers whatsoever. So remember, there is also this absorptive capability of China that has been institutional memory that has lasted with China for the last 2,200 years. Now let's come to modern policy and how it affects all of this. With India, what you see is, first of all, we are completely clueless on what national interest is. Okay, for us, it's all dogma, ideology, jargon, all of that.
So are you talking about the cultural identity crisis? Because somewhere you have stated about China having that uniformity, and we are suffering from that uniformity because Abhijit sir, I think somewhere we are deeply hardwired because there is a lack of cultural identity. We don't know that from where we are coming from.
Because you don't have the basic grounding, the macro grounding in theory that the Chinese have acquired, number one. And the communists are very good at theory. Never forget that. But it's more than that. Hindustan mein, if you look at the Chinese, they've always had a sense of being Chinese. In India, whenever you had that sense of being Indian till the independence struggle realistically. The Vijayanagar Empire, for example, none of the Hindu kingdoms around it supported it when the when the Deccan Sultanates were tearing it apart. Yes. But all the Deccan Sultanates knew that there were Sultanates that needed to get rid of a Hindu empire. Right? When Muhammad Ghazni was destroying Somnath, at the same time, you had Rajendra Chola, who was building Gangaikonda Chorapuram and all of that, great Shiva temples. And even when a Jyotirlinga was being destroyed, Rajendra Chola and the Chalukyas, they were completely unconcerned. They were minding their own business. Rajendra Chola was getting ready to go destroy Malaysia at that point of time. And he went 1 year later, he went and destroyed the Sri Vijaya Empire. After that, the Sri Vijaya Empire never recovered. And, it was his destruction of the Sri Vijaya Empire. People don't realize this. It was the Chola destruction of the Sri Vijaya Empire that opened the door to Islam in Indonesia and Malaysia. Okay. So far from it, you can actually say Rajendra Chola was an ally to the Muslim invasions of India. Yeah. So this identity, now let's get to modern identity. Yeah. China has managed to codify its identity in a very, very clear term. Hum kya hai? What is identity? What am I? What connects Abhijit Iyer Mitra to Amlendu and Paramveer? And what makes us different from Ilhan Omar? What connects the three of us is called substance. What divides us is called salience. Ilhan Omar kyun hamari nahi hai? ठीक है? Here in India, you don't have substance and you don't have salience. You look at the public discourse, they are more ready to see an enemy in the BJP than they are willing to see an enemy in Pakistan. Not that the BJP is any better, that after the Chinese killed 20 of your troops, your foreign minister, your prime minister, they are all very hesitant to call China the enemy. They can't even bring themselves to name China. या तो ये डर है या तो ये कायरता है, पता नहीं, but there's something very, very wrong. So, you know, the one thing I've noticed, and I am a right-winger, unapologetically so, the one thing I've noticed with the right is, I'm sorry, ये थोड़ा गाली गलोच है, but जो उल्लू के पट्टों की संख्या है राइट में, वो बहुत ही ज्यादा है. और जो उल्लू के पट्टों की संख्या है सरकार में, चुन चुन के उल्लू को पट्टों को चुना है.
Okay, so Abhijit, what are the parameters of judging these ullu ke patte? Like, so what are the parameters?
Very simple. If you can't macro policy, if you can't abstract it to theory, because see, everybody says, you know, theory is bad, theory is bad, theory is bad. Theory is bad when you're a JNU student and you start using theory to substitute for facts. Okay. Theory is very important. More than theory, it's abstraction. Abstracting it or macroing it is extremely important in understanding where the broad trends are. The problem is in the right, we tend to micro things. Okay. But anyway, we're getting off the topic. The topic was meant to be China, India. Let's get back to China, India. Right now, you have the issue of the economy, which determines everything else. When I said China has an institutional memory, China also has an institutional memory of foreign policy, of what it is, that it is civilized. Everything around it is inferior, sub-civilized. You know, it was the concept of Sango. Sango is the three, it was actually Nigo, which was two kingdoms. They were only considered to be two civilized kingdoms on earth, China and India. And India was only included because Buddhism went to China. After that, they had to pretend India was civilized. Then when the Japanese got involved, it became Sango, three countries. So Japan, China, and India are the only civilized countries. Everybody else is uncivilized. Now, you therefore have a very, very clear foreign policy from China. And if you guys haven't read it, I would highly recommend you read it, especially in legalistic terms, because when you frame legalistic macro points on this, you need to understand what a pattern of behavior has been. So for example, when you go to court to get a fellow convicted of rape, if you can prove a pattern of sexual behavior, you can get that conviction a lot easier.
Exactly.
There is a book called China's Strategic Culture by Alastair Ian Johnston. Go read it. It will show you that at least for about 1,200, 1,300 years, the Chinese pattern is when you are weak, pretend to be very benign and friendly with everybody else. The moment you gain strength, you go thrash your neighbors.
Yeah.
And neighbors have to be thrashed. There is no friends in your neighborhood. The concept of friends does not exist. They will come thrash you no matter what. Okay? Which is something that I guess Nehru and co in 1962 failed to understand. But this is giving you the general impression. China does not have friends, period. China does not make allies, period. What it does is it gives people nuclear weapons and it creates independent rogue vectors. पाकिस्तान को न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स दिया, नॉर्थ कोरिया को न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स दिया, ईरान को न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स देने की कोशिश की through North Korea. And you know, everybody blames the Syrian reactor on North Korea. That is not true. If you actually look at several UN reports from 1997 to about 2008, 2009, you'll find that the entire network was actually headquartered in Beijing, in spite of China signing on to the NPT. And they were exporting all these they were facilitating the exports from North Korea to Syria. And you know, the amazing thing is, do you know how the Syrian reactor that got bombed by the Israelis was discovered? Does anybody know?
No. I don't know. Just
There was a chemical explosion, in a massive chemical explosion that killed hundreds of people in North Korea.
okay.
And Israeli intelligence discovered that via Beijing, via Tehran, bodies of Syrians were being brought home. And they did not know why is it that Syrian bodies are coming back from North Korea, chemical explosion. And when they started digging, they found that there was a whole reactor that had been built under their eyes, under their satellites, under their electronic intelligence that they had no idea about, that had just popped out of nowhere and it was ready to go operational in no time at all. Okay. So the third thing is China does not respect rules. Now, this is your fundamental problem between China and India. Okay, this has been your fundamental problem between the Muslim invasions of India and the Indian, in India we say, हम धर्म युद्ध करेंगे, हम rules को follow करेंगे. पृथ्वीराज चौहान क्यों जीत गए? Because घोरी conned him into a night attack. हमने मर्यादा से युद्ध लड़ा था. भाई कोई तेरा मर्यादा नहीं देखने वाला है. जब तेरा सर काटेंगे ना, तेरे पे थूक के, तेरे शव पे थूक के तेरे को बरी करेंगे. कोई ये मर्यादा फरियादा नहीं देखता. मर्यादा and all of that, like law is a construct. Law is like money. There is no such thing as law. Okay, there is no such thing as human rights. We concoct these myths to create a civilization. Now, if some person is willing to follow these nonsense concoctions, which are useful in a certain point of view to create a society, and some other people are not, the natural order favors those people that are not. Because they will fundamentally be constantly aggressive and you will be hemmed in by certain rules and norms that you've created for yourself.
Exactly.
Okay. So China keeps using this law breaking all the time. Okay.
So there's
and
a small
this
question.
sort of,
So there's a small question that just popped in my mind, Vijit. So we see that India keeps reminding China about, not interfering in India's internal matters, and you have already stated about China's aggression. So why can't India become vocal for Taiwan and Hong Kong and all of these things that is China been concocted since years?
Look, that's a very simple answer. It is that your bureaucracy, your MEA is compromised at almost every level. First, it is compromised at the formative level, where your reading material, your recommended reading material is the Hindu. It's the works of K.M. Panikkar and other China apologists like that. That is your fundamental reading. Second is when you want to get into a course at international relations at JNU or something like that, 90% of your paper is Marx and Gramsci.
Exactly.
So you're indoctrinated into a sort of left-wing point of view. Your professors are overwhelmingly leftist. Okay. And this is just the input going in. You've still not even gotten into the IAS so far. Okay. Then you go through your entire syllabus is leftist. You have to actually believe in that syllabus to be able to produce something. Then it comes your assessment committee. Okay, you've done okay or not so okay in your paper. जैसे ये शाह फैसल था, उसका written paper तो कुछ भी नहीं था. वो तो बहुत मामूली सा स्टूडेंट था. वो तो बस इंटरव्यू में टॉपर बन गया था ना. It's the interview that made him the topper. So there you have your interview committee, which is again a cabal of people who have been socialized into this entire left-wing whatever, that then come and become your selection committee. So तुम्हारा indoctrination भी leftist, तुम्हारा selection भी उन्हीं indoctrinated leftist से होगा, तुम्हारा बीच में जो university assessment था वो भी leftist से ही होगा. Okay. And you had people like Jayati Ghosh, that so-called economist, who was very open that she'll only give you marks if you joined SFI, Students Federation of India and stuff like that. So this on one hand. Then after you join, you will be amazed. I've seen at least 10-15 diplomats in my time take a line on Kashmir and CA NRC in the last 1.5 years. That is no different from, say, the Hurriyat position. Indian diplomats stationed abroad in private parties, taking a position no different from that of Hurriyat in this thing. So, we all go berserk at New York Times or Washington Post for writing. But your own diplomats sitting in, say, Washington or New York or whatever are also undermining you. And you don't even have proper counterintelligence to keep tabs on them, see what they're saying, vet them, and all of that. Next, what happens is that a lot of these diplomats and bureaucrats are genuinely compromised by China. China is famous for honey traps. This is why no Western diplomat is sent to China or Russia who is unmarried or who has who hasn't had a thorough counterintelligence background check done and seen to it that they don't have extramarital affairs or gambling problems or drinking problems and things like that. In India, boss, agar tum sarkar mein kaam karte ho, you are the obvious target of intelligence agencies, but because you are joint secretary or something like that, no counterintelligence will even touch you. You can literally click pictures of top secret files and be WhatsApping it to Beijing. They won't touch you. Okay, because क्यों? My बाप culture. Joint secretary हैं, हम कुछ नहीं बोल सकते हैं. Okay. The Taiwanese, for example, have been telling me for almost 8 years that that a certain, I'm not going to name names, but two people who are guiding Indian foreign policy over the last 8 to 10 years were complete Chinese agents. Of course, the Taiwanese say that about everyone, but sometimes the way we behave, it's very hard to, ignore the Taiwanese. So does that answer your question? That,
Yeah, exactly.
How are we so this thing about China? And this is also where, notice, China हमारे मुंह पे थप्पड़ मारे जाता है और हम चीन को कुछ भी नहीं करते हैं. But अमेरिका एक छोटा सा भी चीज बोल दे, we get completely wild, crazy, this thing. हमारे sovereignty पे हमला हुआ है, हमारे इस पे हमला हुआ है, and all of that. Excessive sensitivity to the West. Lots of courage. If India had even half the courage of taking on China that it does with America, I'd be very impressed. But I think this was ultimately nailed up. This has a lot to do with the caste system also. If you notice here in India, the more powerful you are, the more obnoxious and rude you tend to be. The lower down the economic ladder you are, the more polite and humble you tend to be. Okay, and this is something that comes out with, I think, was it Bhattarai or Koirala? One of the prime ministers of Nepal said this. Nepal is surrounded by two dogs. The dog to our north doesn't bark, but it bites. The dog to our south doesn't bite, but it keeps barking. Okay. So there is this fear of China. There is no fear of America because America won't bite you. China will bite you. And we pass off our cowardice as strategy, which is the worst thing to do. Okay.
I want to interrupt you in between. I just want to ask you a simple question because you have mentioned America, because we are getting a friendly relationship with America. We are tolerating America actually, So how is America's relationship with India affecting our relationship with Russia? Because somehow it is evidently Russia is promoting ties with China and Pakistan.
So there is, we need to deal with this in two separate ways. One is just purely bilateral and then as a triangle with America coming in. Bilaterally, what happened was Russia realized very, very long back that it was losing power big time. Okay. And the problem was that even after it lost the Cold War, you had an entire lobby in Washington that wanted Russia to keep remaining the enemy. And this was the same lobby that had been compromised by Chinese money. So you never redirect attention towards China. You just keep focusing on Russia. Okay? So what happens with Russia is that they obviously saw, and this was Primakov, Prime Minister Primakov, under Boris Yeltsin, who started up this idea of this Delhi, Beijing, Moscow axis. Okay. Because he said Russia is not powerful enough to take on America, but we can do this along with India and China. In those days, China wasn't as powerful as it became much later on. I mean, even though in 1997 onwards, China was pretty damn powerful, it was still nowhere near what it is today. Okay. Because they've had consistent, 15 to 17% growth over those years, and they've gone way, way ahead. So what happened was that India's problem was, देखो भाई हम तुम्हारे साथ मिलने के लिए तैयार हैं, but we don't want China involved in all of this. Russia's thing is, quite accurately, that India is a nobody, Russia is a nobody. Two nobodies still equal a nobody. You need to have China there. The thing is, because China is powerful, Russia individually cannot resist China, India individually cannot resist China. But if we form a tripartite alliance, then within that alliance, there will be a Russo-Indian alliance that either moderates or reduces the power of China or moderates its aggressive tendencies. Okay. This is the way they saw things. America played into this because their entire Cold War bureaucracy continued. Even though the Cold War stopped, that entire mindset continued. They are very Eurocentric. For them, Europe is where they seek validation. It is Europe. It is still not American ideas that influence Europe. It is European ideas that still influence America, especially for the left wing, especially for the Democrats and things like that. And for now, for Russia, it's a case of, भाई देखो हम तुम्हारे साथ झगड़ना नहीं चाहते हैं, तुम हमारे साथ बार बार झगड़े जा रहे हो, even though there is a bigger threat called China out there. So the way it affects India-Russia relations is, it appears in three ways. Politically, they are not averse to us getting close to America. Economically, they are not averse to us getting close to America, if we use that relation as a bridge between America and Russia. The problem is, we never market ourselves as the trusted moderator between America and Russia, because Russia trusts us completely, America trusts us completely. We have never actually used that role to say, bhai, shant raho, hum dono ko milayenge. The third, where Russia and America are absolutely not willing to trust India, is the military. Okay, where they say कि अगर तुमने American equipment लिया, हम तुमको source code नहीं देंगे, we are not going to give you the codes for the equipment we sell you, and vice versa. And that has now led to a huge problem for India, because we buy from both, but both these things can't talk. It's like one person, instead of buying two Apples or two Androids and having seamless interconnectivity, तुमने एक Apple kharida, but you haven't even bought Android. You've bought an obsolete Windows phone that is now no longer compatible with anything else.
Okay.
Windows phone का 2018 या 2017 में खत्म हुआ था?
2017.
2017. Yeah. So, you now have this kind of a problem happening. So essentially what you have is two militaries. You refuse to, and because you're not even able to economically perform, your relative strength in bargaining with both America and Russia reduces. And so the Russian position is, India is not buying enough from us, or India is being duplicitous with us, or India is not performing enough for us to trust India economically. And fourth, India is not using its position to create a bridge between us and America. As opposed to Germany, which was doing all those things. The problem with Germany, of course, was because it was European, it got caught up in this whole trap laid by Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Ukraine, which was because they wanted to get away, they wanted to get into the EU. They went on saying Russia is a threat, Russia is a threat, Russia is a threat, and got the US involved in their own petty squabbles with Russia. So you're stuck in that position. And, this is a pattern that I'm trying to show you. Consistent economic clumsiness, consistent diplomatic clumsiness, and your diplomatic clumsiness, in Nehru's time, your diplomacy kind of was meant to compensate for your economic non-performance. It never worked. It was always sort of counterproductive. Now, though, it's become next level counterproductive. Okay. It's variations. It's a different kind of counterproductive. In Nehru's time, it was going on abusing America for everything under the sun. Today, it's abusing everyone and everything except your actual enemy is China, because there's nothing else you can do. When you have nothing to show, no economic growth, no proper economic growth, or whatever, then you tend to make, कहते हैं ना, empty pots make the loudest noise.
Exactly. So actually, Abhijit, I wanted to ask you one question. You were talking about we still facing a problem because we are still facing the problem which we were facing before 2013 and 2014 after the BJP coming into the power. So how long is it gonna take? Like still it's been like 6 years and we are still into the same place in terms of having relationship with China and Pakistan and all these diplomatic alliances. Okay, so what do you want to say about that?
So I don't know if you guys have read this poem, Ozymandias. It's a very famous poem. Search it on Google. उसमें एक line है, men may come and men may go. It's about a guy coming across a pharaoh, an Egyptian pharaoh's head of a sphinx, of a former sphinx, or of a huge statue in the desert. And that statue head talks to him and says, men may come and men may go, but I go on forever. So here what you have is essentially BJP may come and Congress may go, but the IAS goes on forever. Okay? So as somebody said, I think it was a BJP leader who said this, that what you have is not a BJP ka sarkar, you have a IAS ka sarkar with outside support from the BJP. If that is the case, if your entire policy making is determined by and only influenced by the IAS IFS lobby, this is what your policy is going to be. Kya change hone wala hai? You have people in the financial service who don't know finance. If you remember during lockdown, there was this absolutely idiotic policy paper that young officers of the Indian Economic Service had produced. And I have never seen a more economically clueless paper than that. And these are people in your economic service. IAS वाले भी economics नहीं जानते हैं. Then where are you going to go, boss?
Yeah, no way.
भाषण से policy नहीं बनता है. There is this belief in India that bhashan is policy. Bhashan is not policy. You do need to do more than kadi ninda, but see, the problem is, do you have the military resources to do it? Do you have the economic resources to do it? Do you have the alliance to do it? No. Okay, your military can probably win some kind of action for about 2 weeks. Uske baad, China is just much more economically stronger than you. Okay, and industrial depth determines the outcome of the war. Right? Germany didn't understand this during World War II. Japan understood this very well during World War II, which is why, if you remember, when Admiral Yamamoto was asked by Emperor Hirohito, are we going to win this before Pearl Harbor? He said, sir, I can only guarantee you victory for 6 months. After that, we're going to lose. Japan understood this, and still it went to war. Germany never understood this. Hitler did not understand this. He thought that because Germany had such advanced technology, and they were truly advanced, there is not a single rocket engine flying today. There isn't a single wing form on a plane flying today that wasn't pioneered by the Germans. Since the Germans discovered flying wings, there has not been a single new wing design, period. Okay, delta wing, long wing, short wing, front wing, canard wing, back wing, everything was discovered by the Germans. But innovation and technical advancement is not a substitute for the size of your economy. In the end, when you added Russia, America, and Britain, they outsized the German economy by something like 13 or 14:1, and you just can't win that equation, boss. It's just not going to happen. Okay? So you don't have the military might, you don't have the industrial might, you don't have the diplomatic weight. And now if Biden wins the presidency, which I personally think now he's almost won it, I'm not seeing a Trump legal challenge coming, at least not to the strength that I expected it to come. If you look at his son's dealings with the Chinese, clearly he's also been compromised by the Chinese. Okay, you look at the entire Obama presidency, he came up with something called the pivot to Asia.
Yeah.
Does anyone remember the pivot to Asia? Everyone remembers? Yeah. But what did he actually do? Nothing. He was he gave lip service to को हम China को लड़ाई करेंगे, but his focus was always in Europe and Russia. Right? So the Chinese are also very smart with the way they play this. They say तुमको जो बोलना है हमारे खिलाफ बोल लो, पर हमारे खिलाफ एक्शन नहीं लेना है.
Okay.
ठीक है? And that is again what you will see with Biden. So you have absolutely no cards to play in this game.
Okay, so is it going to affect us, affect our economy? Because I just heard it somewhere, or maybe I read it somewhere, that Biden coming into the power and him being a president of United States is going to be, going to affect our economy. So, is there any legitimate, inference out there?
Surprisingly, Biden is going to be better for the Indian economy than Trump is. Why? Because India is a status quo economy. Since Narasimha Rao did deep changes in 1991, we have not had any serious economic reforms. We've had lots of fraud economic reforms, fake economic reforms, so-called demonetization and all that crap, or very badly implemented GST that's destroyed the micro, medium, small sector. And by itself, GST was a good idea. Okay, the problem is you can't take a cut and paste idea, because GST even at 4 slabs may work, but unless you accept the fact that the Indian medium level bureaucrat is basically a thulla, a thug, who will use every law to harass and extort bribes and whatever, it means you didn't understand India, and it also means you didn't understand economics. And I honestly, for a prime minister who's won 303, I don't know what is worse, that he does not understand economics or he does not understand India. But being the economy that we are, static economy, no real fundamental changes in it, just natural growth year after year. Why was Trump going to be bad? Because he was taking back industrial jobs to America from China. That was his stated goal. Now that can't happen economically speaking unless you move towards 3D printing. Now, if you had moved towards 3D printing, which would have brought the costs down, because American labor is extremely expensive and American labor laws are quite prohibitive, unlike Chinese labor laws, which aren't actually followed at all, right? So you bring it to 3D printing. Ab 3D printing mein pehla kya replace hota hai? First things that will get 3D printed are easy to make products like toothbrush, light bulb and things like that. And then you progress to more sophisticated things like, say, remote control or mouse, before finally going to iPhones and computers and all of that. Now, China's economy is a middle economy here. India's economy is a low-level production economy here. Yeah. The first things that would get replaced were your low-level production things like toothbrush, bulb, toilet paper, and all of that. In which case, you would have been hurt the most. China would have only started getting hurt 10, 15 years down the line when the sophistication of 3D printing reached that level of production. Okay? Biden is different. Because the Chinese have compromised him, he is not even going to start moving that middle level production to America. So it actually benefits us that जब वो middle level production move नहीं करेगा, तो जरूर low level production भी move नहीं करेगा. So 3D printing, you're not really going to see that much emphasis on it. Okay. So for the way India is, Biden is better. For the way India thinks it is, which doesn't actually exist, it's a dream. It's a delusion. It's a heroin-induced or a crystal meth-induced delusion. Based on that, Trump would have been better for us in the long run, not in the short run. There is no equation by which Trump was good for us economically in the short run. Though I was hoping that what he did would sort of, light the fire under our bottoms and force us to do certain economic changes necessary. Now, even that doesn't exist. So in about 10 to 12 years, you're going to see the Indian economy just start getting more and more relevant like it was in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. So There is a thing that I wanted to shift this conversation into this economical part, because certainly it seems more relevant nowadays, as China has been successfully injecting this virus throughout the world, and China is kept in isolation as a result of that injecting virus. China is kept in isolation by European countries as well as USA also. So is it a point for us to celebrate, or the diplomacy of the nation is different as we think of? Because I read that China has this ginormous share of export in the world of economy.